Hello everyone and welcome to Coderific. If I asked you what programming is, you might say it's writing code. I don't think it is. I think programming is a way of thinking. It's the ability to take a program, break it into small steps, and design a path from the beginning to the solution. And like every way of thinking, it doesn't come from watching videos or memorizing syntax. Instead, it comes from practice. For me, my favorite place to practice programming isn't even on a computer. It's on paper. Just a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. Because paper forces you to think before the computer starts thinking for you. When you are staring at an empty page, there is no autocomplete, no compiler, no AI suggesting the next line. It's just you and the logic. That's where programming is born. Once you develop this skill, something interesting happens. The programming language almost stops mattering. Whether it is Python, Java, C++, JavaScript, or something you have never seen before, you are no longer learning how to program. You are simply learning the vocabulary of a language you already know how to speak. Syntax becomes the easy part. Logic is the hard part. So let's build that logic together. Imagine your computer's memory as a huge collection of empty boxes. When we declare a variable, we are simply asking the computer to reserve one of those boxes, age. At first the box is empty. Then we write age is equal to 20. Now the box contains the value 20. Later we can change it. Age is equal to 21. The same box, but with a different value. Programming is really just creating these boxes and changing what's inside them according to a set of rules. That's all variables are. Once you can picture these boxes in your mind, algorithms become much easier to understand. So instead of rushing to write code, we will practice moving values from one box to another. We will predict what happens after every instruction. We will draw memory, we will trace every step, we will make mistakes, we will erase them, we will try again. Because that's actually what real programmers do. As we continue, the challenges will slowly become more interesting. We will start with simple algorithm with some condition and loops. I will show you how to design a problem first on the paper where the thinking happens. Remember that computer isn't where programming begins. It's where our ideas come to life. If you can solve a problem with a pencil, you can solve it in any programming language. So grab a sheet of paper. Let's train the skill that never becomes obsolete. Let's begin with a simple problem. The problem is to write a program that receives a positive integer n and prints a triangle with n rows. Each position in the triangle should contain either 0 or 1. So for example, for n is equal to 1, the output should be as shown below. Before we write an algorithm, let's slow down and study the pattern. What do you see here? I see the output should be in the grid pattern with multiple rows and multiple columns. The first row contains one value, the second row contains two values, and third row contains three values, and so on. So our first observation is simple. Each row prints as many values as its row number. Now look at the values themselves. They alternate between 0 and 1, but there is another pattern. Odd numbered rows begin with 1, while even numbered rows begin with 0. At this point, we already have enough information to design an algorithm. We could decide the starting value based on the row, print it, and then switch the value after every position. But let's look one level deeper. Instead of only looking at the values, let's label every position with a row number and a column number. When the row number plus the column number is even, the pattern contains 1. But when the sum is odd, the pattern contains 0. So this gives us clear rule for every position. If row plus column is even, print 1, otherwise print 0. So for this algorithm, we will need two loops. The first loop or the outer loop will control the number of rows, and the inner loop or the second loop will control the number of columns. And rows and number of columns must be equal to the number provided by the user. So notice that we did not begin directly with C++. We began by observing, questioning, predicting, and finding a rule. This is programming. In this slide, I have created an algorithm mostly following the C++ syntax. And on right side, you see a grid that we need to fill by running this algorithm on paper, line by line. To run this algorithm, imagine we have provided a value from the user and that value for n is equal to 4. So in the first iteration, we start with the outer loop where we have assigned 1 as the first value to the row variable, and then we check what is the condition. So here we want to keep the row number less than or equal to the number provided by the user. So our row in first iteration is 1. And the condition here is true, which is 1 is less than or equal to 4, which is true. Let's move on to the next line. The inner loop starts with the column variable by setting it to 1. And the condition is that 1 should be less than or equal to row's value. And 1 is less than or equal to 1. Condition is fulfilled. Move on to the next line. This line checks if row plus column remainder 2 is equal to 0. So our current row and column values are 1 and 1 respectively, and their sum is 2, and its remainder with 2 is equal to 0. Condition is fulfilled. Move on to the next line, that is immediately after the loop. In next iteration, let's go back to the inner loop, increment the handler by 1, and then check its value. Now the column has become 2. From 1, let's check if 2 is less than or equal to 1, which is current value of row, and the condition is not true, so it will break out of this loop and quickly jump to the last line of the outer loop, which is move to the next line. Then in this iteration, the row handler is incremented by 1, which has now become 2, and the condition is 2 is less than or equal to n, which is 4. Condition is true. Move on to the next line. Column's value is reset to 1, and the condition is fulfilled, which is 1 is less than or equal to 2, which is current value of row. Condition is fulfilled. Move on to the next line where we have to check the sum of row and column if the sum remainder 2 is equal to 0. And here the sum of 2 plus 1 is 3 and the remainder with 2 is not equal to 0. So in this case, we have to run the else statement of if block, which is to print 0. Then move back to the inner loop, increment it by 1, which is now 2. 2 is less than or equal to 2. Yes. Move on to the next line. Now 2 plus 2, remainder 2 is equal to 0. Condition is true. Moving on to the next line, which is printing 1. Now let's go back to the inner loop, increment the handler by 1, which has now become 3. Checking the condition if 3 is still less than or equal to the current value of row, which is 2. So 3 is not less than or equal to 2. Then we have to break out of this inner loop and go to the last line of the outer loop, which is to move on to the next line. Incrementing the row variable by 1, which has now become 3. Checking the condition 3 is less than or equal to 4, which is true. Move on to the next line. Reset the column value and check its condition if 1 is less than or equal to the current value of row, which is 3, and the condition is true. Move on to the next line. The sum of 3 plus 1, remainder 2 is equal to 0. Yes. Run the first statement, which is printing 1. Then go back to the inner loop, increment the column by 1, check its condition. Column has now become 2. 2 is less than or equal to 3. Condition is fulfilled. Move on to the next line. Check the sum of row and column and see if remainder 2 is equal to 0 in this case, which is not. So we have to go to the else statement and print 0 here. Then go back to the inner loop, increase the column by 1 value, check the condition. Column has now become 3. Condition is still fulfilled. Move on to the next line. The remainder of the sum of row and column is 0. So we have to print 1 in the next line and then go back to the inner loop, increase column by 1, check its condition. Column value has become 4 now, which is not fulfilling this condition. So we have to break out of this inner loop and go to the last line of the outer loop, which is moving on to the next line. Then incrementing the row by 1, checking its condition. If row, which is now 4, is less than or equal to 4, which is true, move on to the next line. Start the column with 1, check its condition. When 1 is less than or equal to 4, yes, then check the sum, and in this case the remainder is not equal to 0, then we have to go to the else block to print 0. Coming back to the inner loop, increment column value, which has now become 2, checking the condition. 2 is less than or equal to 4, condition is fulfilled. Moving on to the next line, checking the sum of row and column and then its remainder with 2. Yes, condition is fulfilled because the 6 remainder 2 is equal to 0. Running the first statement of if block, which is to print 1. Moving back, increasing the value of column by 1, which has now become 3. 3 is less than or equal to 4. Yes, move on to the next line, and the sum of these new values, remainder 2 is not equal to 0, so we have to run the else block and print 0 here. Moving back to the inner loop, increasing the value of column by 1, which has now become 4, checking its condition. 4 is less than or equal to 4. Yes, move on to the next line. Check the sum and its remainder with 2, which is fulfilling the condition. Then we have to run the next statement by printing 1. Then coming back to the inner loop again, increasing the column value breaks out of inner loop because it has now become 5 and 5 is not less than or equal to 4. Moving to the last line of the outer loop, which is adding new line, and then going back to the outer loop, increasing the row here also breaks out. New row's value has become now 5 and 5 is not fulfilling this condition, which is 5 is less than or equal to 4, which is not true. So the program ends here. Here I want you to remember one thing. Programming is not a programming language. Programming is not C++ or Python, but instead it's the ability to think logically and design a solution to a problem. A computer only executes instructions. You are the one who creates those instructions. The stronger your thinking becomes, the easier every programming language becomes. So don't rush to your keyboard. Pick up a pencil, train your mind, design your algorithms, trace them on paper. Make mistakes, erase them, improve them, because that's where real programmers are made. Before you leave, I have a challenge for you. Not a coding challenge, a thinking challenge. Take out a blank sheet of paper and without opening your computer, design an algorithm to print a star pyramid like this. Then take a picture of your paper and share it in the comments or tag me on social media. I would love to see how you think, and I may feature some of the best algorithm designs in the future video. If this video changed the way you think about programming, consider subscribing. In the next video, we will continue building this mindset by tackling more challenging problems, especially in image processing, always starting on paper before we ever touch the keyboard. Until then, keep thinking, keep practicing, and remember, programming is a mindset built on paper.